So we've gone through all the embodied planets and the disembodied planets, Rahu and Ketu, and now it's time to consider the outer planets, which aren't typically used in traditional Vedic astrology. What got me started using the outer planets? A few things, really. Number one, I guess it was about 4 years ago. Doesn't seem that long. But about 4 years ago, I was doing a 12-month report for one of my clients, longtime clients, so I've worked with her quite extensively in the past. And for some odd reason, I was sitting there, I believe it might have been December, and I was considering, what do I need to know here? And it popped into my mind that the outer planets, I needed to know what the outer planets were doing in regards to her chart, because they were going to have a very profound impact. And I thought to myself, well, that's a little crazy because we don't use those in Vedic astrology. And I was a bit of a traditionalist at the time. I was one of those folks who said it has to be this way, otherwise it's not right or you're wrong, which didn't really work out in the long run. But anyway, I started considering this, and I Googled it. I Googled the outer planets. And what popped up but a course on the outer planets by Ernst Wilhelm, who happened to be the creator of Kala, the astrological software I used. So I thought, all right, I'll explore this, and I downloaded that class. And I believe it was a 16-hour class, maybe an 18-hour class. It took a long time to go through it. But he was describing the use of the outer planets in regards to transits and showing the deeper issues that we're dealing with in life. So they're called transpersonal planets because the inner planets, Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, those planets, they do show how our life unfolds, but more from a concrete, and you might consider materialistic levels, like the very tangible things that you're going to experience in life. You meet this person, you have this kind of education, you get this kind of sickness, this thing heals you. You know, these very tangible things. Those are the inner planets. But the outer planets, the transpersonal planets, they show the state of our inner consciousness. What is it that's going on a much deeper level? How are we evolving? How are we transforming? How are we changing on an inner level? And those are important because what's going on inside is very much going to impact how you deal with the things on the outside. If you go into one kind of situation and you're stressed out and angry and anxious, well, you might completely mess up what you were trying to do because internally you weren't mentally, emotionally, psychically prepared to attend to the task at hand. If you go into that same situation, even if it's a hard situation, but you're poised, you're confident, even if it's a hard situation, you succeed, and you succeed very well. So the inner state of an individual helps us to see how are we going to, or how are they going to work with the concrete, tangible things around us. And so the outer planets show us this. And I was very happy to begin using the outer planets because those specific transits of, I believe it was Neptune and Pluto, over this client's certain Bhava cusps and certain planets, natal planets, she stayed in touch with me over that year, and she said that it was those points that I mentioned dealing with those transits that were the most significant life-changing events for her. Not necessarily externally, but the way she viewed the world, the way she viewed the things that she needed to do in life, how she needed to change. So after that, I began considering the outer planets. And then shortly after that, Richard Fish, co-author of The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology with me, he had been practicing Vedic, traditional Vedic, and also Western astrology simultaneously for a good 30, 40 years by that time. And he said, oh yeah, sure. I always use the outer planets. They really help you see when big changes are going to occur. How I missed that talking to him, I don't know. But that's one of the reasons why we include just a brief section on the outer planets within the book, The Art and Science of Vedic Astrology, when it comes to transits. Now, let's consider what each of these planets mean individually and what they do in the chart. Remember, this is a big topic. A lot of work can be done researching, exploring this topic. So if you want to get down to the details, please go to AshevilleVedicAstrology.com to the course section, MP3 audio course section, and download Ernst Wilhelm's course. That'll give you plenty of information on these planets. But since we're doing more of a foundational series here, we'll just briefly touch upon them. So Uranus. So, of the 3 levels of consciousness, Uranus represents that first level that we're here to develop. And that has to do with becoming secure in our individuality and being able to express our individuality and creative potential. So whatever houses Uranus is in, whatever planets Uranus is close to within the birth chart, or even transiting in the birth chart, it can show that it is those houses, those areas of life, and those particular planets that we need to learn to accept our individuality, our own individual ideas about those things, and learn to express them freely, free of judgment, and learning to trust that what we think about these houses, or what we think about these particular planets, is part of our expression of this divine infinite consciousness. So we have the whole divine infinite consciousness, one whole thing. And then there's us. And we are little expressions of that. Just like within our body, we have bone cells and blood cells and brain cells and epithelial cells and all these sorts of things. So it is the individuality of these cells coming together that makes the greater whole. So learning to accept and appreciate your own individuality, those things you want to express in a healthy manner, that's part of this whole process. So the more planets that are also close to the same degree as Uranus will have a bigger impact in regards to developing our individuality. Basically, Uranus takes us outside of our norm. If it is on our ascendant or in the first bhava cusp, then our personality might just be different or not normal or not fit into society. And it's part of our task to figure out, well, what about us are we meant to do, or are we meant to express, that will fulfill that uniqueness and allow us to feel secure in that process of creative expression. If Uranus is in the 10th house, maybe with career or status, you're going to do something different with your career, or you're going to do something different with the activity that you have in the world that's different than the culture that you come from. So consider the house, and we have about 3 or 4 videos, I think, before we get into the houses specifically, but consider the house and what that house means. And wherever Uranus is placed, whatever house Uranus is in, it will be the affairs of that house where you are meant to express your own innate, unique individuality and grow into yourself and develop a sense of security despite what other people were doing. So Uranus, planet of individuality. Neptune. So once we start to have, we start to make peace with who we are as an individual and what we're meant to express as an individual, then we look to Neptune. And Neptune shows our need to connect with something greater than ourselves. Meaning that whatever house Neptune is in, it's going to be the affairs of that house that we are going to try to find fulfillment through. We're going to have deep longings to want to connect with the affairs of that house. And Neptune is trying to inspire us to go beyond attachment to the things of that house. What does that mean? Neptune, in a way, reminds me of Ketu, and Uranus, in a way, reminds me of Rahu. But with Neptune, it's aiming to spur you to great spiritual realization in a sense that, for example, let's say Neptune is in your 2nd house, which can deal with finances, it can deal with your family, immediate family, it can deal with how you provide for yourself. If Neptune is there, it's going to give you this drive that if you could only provide for your family, if you'd only provide for yourself, if only you could connect with your family in a very profound way, then you would have spiritual fulfillment. Then you would have that great ease that comes with liberation of consciousness. But Neptune indicates a bit of an imbalance there, fantasy, if you can imagine it that way. So there's a fantasy that if you just did these things right, you would feel the sense of divine connection and completion. But what we have to do is we have to look to the house opposite of Neptune. So if we're talking about the 2nd house, what we need to do is see that it is the 8th house that we need to develop, because the 8th house is directly across from the 2nd. And the 8th house is our psychological well-being, our capacity to accept support or resources from other people. So with Neptune in the 2nd, there'll be more of a focus on being responsible for oneself, taking care of others, trying to connect very deeply with the family. And that's where we're going to get tripped up, because in order to have that sense of greater fulfillment, we need to develop the opposite house. And the opposite of the 2nd is the 8th. And the 8th house is learning to find that inner contentment on your own, not having to do anything for anyone else, not having to provide for everyone else, but learn to feel at peace internally, and then also learn to accept support from others, because the 8th house represents financial support and support from other people. So Neptune's a bit of a tricky planet, and you need to see what house is it it's in. What does that house represent? And that's going to be where often you're going to try to find this great fulfillment, where you're going to try to fulfill your longings, your greater sense of the bigger picture. But the more you try to do that, you miss the boat. And you have to look at the house opposite of Neptune's placement. Again, this is in the natal chart, so we're not talking about transits here, we're talking about the natal chart. And it's within that house that you develop to where you start to find that peace and that satiation to the longings and the great desires that Neptune can create. So by doing that, then you begin to complete this process of fulfillment and union to something greater, or that sense of being connected to something greater. Pluto. Pluto is a planet that is considered to be the ego destroyer in my experience, and it's also the planet where the greatest breakthroughs can come about. So if you look at Pluto in the birth chart, see what house it's in. Whatever house it's in, that's where there's going to be a strong need to destroy egocentric ideas. And the egocentric ideas of I and mine, that sort of grasping and clinging. And what I've often found in people's charts is wherever Pluto's placed, that is where a person is going to experience the most frustration. So if it's in the 3rd house, maybe siblings, there's a strong energy towards being frustrated with one's siblings. And it's trying to break your egocentric ideas of how you think your siblings should be. If it's in the 2nd house, it can deal with, again, finances or the family. The family or your finances might be a strong point of contention for you, where you have a lot of egocentric, egotistical ideas that don't always get proven true in reality or in fact. So essentially, wherever Pluto's placed, that's going to indicate where there is a lot of pain and frustration, mainly due to too much egocentricity, too much willfulness, trying to make things happen in a certain way. And the more you try, the harder you push, the more that house, the affairs of that house gets destroyed and frustrates you and causes you more pain. So again, what's called for? To consider the house opposite of Pluto. By developing the house opposite of Pluto in a healthy way, in a healthy fashion, then you start to relieve this difficulty that Pluto creates in the house in which it's placed, natally speaking. Now these are, again, very general descriptions of the outer planets. And as I mentioned, when I first learned about them, I went through an 18-hour course along with a booklet that described them to me. So we're just gently touching upon these things. But they're important to note. And it's also important to note the planets, as I mentioned with Uranus, the planets that are with or close to. And I usually consider them within the same Navamsha, within 3 degrees or thereabouts, but mainly in the same Navamsha. When we have a planet within 3 degrees or very close to an inner planet, such as Sun, Moon, Mars, Jupiter, then what that shows is it is that planet and the influences, the indications of the inner planet that we need to work through. So what do I mean by that? Let's say Neptune and Venus. Well, if we're talking about a man's chart, and we have Neptune close to Venus, the man might be very romantic, might have a strong affection for women or the women in his life, and try to really fulfill himself through the women in his life. But the more he tries to do that, the more he misses the point, because he's meant to find the divine, not necessarily through that energy, but he's meant to transcend it, to find the more, how would I put it, transcendent aspect. So with Venus, Venus can represent women, Venus can represent love and romance, and with Neptune and Venus together, the person tries to fulfill themselves through women, romance, love. But what's called for is to aim to develop divine love. So connecting to the goddess energy, meditating on the rapture of connecting to God, or samadhi. So we're taking this basic idea of human love and a human person, a woman, and we're transmuting it into directing our energy towards the more transcendent aspect of it. Okay, Neptune and the moon, there can be a strong connection to the mother. Now with that example, what we can do is we can advise the person to maybe volunteer for women who are single mothers. So we're transmuting this attachment to just a single idea of mother, and we're making it more transcendent, to where the person is able to share their need for divine union on a much broader scale, and it helps the world in a bigger picture kind of way. You can look at it like that. With Pluto, whatever planet Pluto is close to, that'll show where we have a lot of frustration, where we have a lot of ideas of how things should be. And if it's Jupiter, that could be around our guru or our philosophy. No matter how hard we try to make it work the way we think it should, it blows up in our face. So again, it's going beyond that hard willfulness of Pluto. If we have Pluto and, again, Venus together, well, that again can show difficulties with relating to the opposite sex in a man's chart, or in the chart of an individual who likes women, and that the person needs to let go of their egocentric desires around the planets that Pluto is with. Again, I'm talking about this in regards to natal planets. So if you look at the birth chart and you see Pluto and Venus in the natal chart and the birth chart are close together, consider that. With Uranus, whatever planet Uranus is close to, again within 3 degrees or in the same Navamsha, that is, the energy of that planet is what we need to develop our individuality around. If it's the Sun, and we have Uranus and the Sun together, maybe we need to really develop our individuality around how we express as an authority figure. How do we lead? Maybe we need to do it in a different way, in a way that's a little more inspired, a little more focused on our individual ideas of what it means to lead, not necessarily what do other people think it means, or what has society in general said it means to lead. So consider this with the outer planets. Now let's go on a little bit further. We'll just talk briefly about the effects of the outer planets, in particular bhavas, or on particular bhava cusps. And those of you who are curious, I use the Campanus system with bhava cusps. And when you do that, sometimes the bhava cusps get bunched up in a rashi or a sign together, which is good because it will give you more accurate information. But it's bad because sometimes if you get someone born in a really far northern clime, or really far south from the equator, you can get up to 4 bhava cusps in each sign sometimes, which can be kind of confusing. But anyway, let's not worry about that for now. So first of all, Uranus. So see what house or bhava cusp Uranus is aspecting. It is that house, the indications of that house or that bhava cusps, that you must learn to live like an individual, to accept yourself as an individual. Typically within that house there'll be feelings of restlessness, a person will feel unstable. But the more you learn to accept your individual inspiration, the more peace you do find within that house. So it's learning to live as an individual, as we've been talking about. With Neptune, whatever house Neptune is in, or even what planet Neptune is influencing, you or the person must learn to expand your thoughts around that house, or how you feel around that house. So it's not about focusing on an individual or a specific thing. It's about learning to see what is the energy of that house, what is the indications of that house, and how can you expand your heart and your mind to include an ability to work with that house in a much greater transcendent way. So again, it's all about kind of moving beyond these ego needs. And once you do that, discontent and longings, they start to fade away. So find a way to be of service in regards to the indications of the house in which Neptune is placed. With Pluto, this shows where your will, your willfulness, and will is good, so we don't want to say that will is bad, but your willfulness or your egocentric needs, wherever Pluto is placed, whatever house that is, whatever that house represents, it's your egocentric needs and your willfulness that needs to be destroyed. You will want to make things a certain way in that house because you want to feel secure. But Pluto's job is to give up security, to give up this past idea of what it means to be secure in a situation, to push your boundaries, essentially. And to work with that well, again, look at the house opposite of Pluto. So, past example, if your Pluto's in the 10th house and you're trying to make your career happen in a certain way, or you're trying to act in the world in a certain way, and it just keeps blowing up in your face, well, that's Pluto trying to break your ego attachment there. And you want to look to the opposite of the 10th, which is the 4th house, which is putting more time into your home life, putting more time into your own happiness, your own ability to feel content emotionally. So instead of working towards career, you might need to go to a psychologist to learn what you need to do to feel healthy and happy and calm inside. Or you might need to start meditating. So wherever Pluto is placed, that's where we're going to have the biggest problems with our will getting thwarted, our egocentric needs not getting met, which causes the pain and frustration. And then we need to withdraw and look to the opposite house, because it's that house we need to develop in order to find the kind of peace that we're looking for with these outer planets. All right, so good. So we'll just talk about a few other things. Talk about some transits and what happens when we have the outer planets transiting a point. And you can start looking at this now. See where Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto have been transiting in your chart. Take note of any natal planets that they might have gone over. See if when they hit just within the Navamsha area, or even right on within a degree of that planet, if a big event occurred or some kind of inner transformation or change came up for you. So with Uranus, this hastens change. So it disrupts the affairs of the house that it's in or the planets that it's influencing. So if you're having relationship problems and Uranus goes over your 7th house or your Jupiter or your Venus, well, that can create a very sudden need for change to make things different. It can speed up the process, which can be stressful, especially if you're trying to work through it in a very methodical, thoughtful way. Uranus comes along and all of a sudden it just changes. With Neptune, Neptune brings a sense of deception around the affairs of the house or the planet that it's influencing. Meaning that if Neptune is transiting, say, your 9th house, and let's say you have a relationship with a guru or a teacher, and it just so happens that you start that relationship right as Neptune is transiting that 9th Bhava cusp or Jupiter or sensitive points within the 9th house, well, you'll be prone to fantasy, to a sense of nebulous love. Basically, you won't be seeing things clearly. So what you have to be aware of with Neptune is that it can bring a sense of fantasy or difficulty seeing what's really going on in that area of your life. So if you're in a difficult situation and Neptune is influencing a planet or a house and dealing with that situation, you need to be careful and take your time, because you don't want to make a mistake based on strange ideas or fantasies. And Neptune has a tendency to dissolve our attachments to certain things. And since Neptune deals with fantasy and imagination, sometimes we're giving up something that might be good for an idea that's not really supportive of you in your life. So you got to be careful with transits of Neptune. On the positive side, Neptune can be very good for contemplative practices, devotional practices, and it can be very good for situations where you need to give yourself to a greater cause or something bigger than you. So it's not about you, it's about how you can help and support greater humanity based on the house that Neptune is in. So Pluto being the ultimate planet of transformation, it will bring up anything deep down inside that you need to work through or get rid of. So whenever Pluto crosses a sensitive house cusp, or a planet, you can bet that the affairs of that house or the affairs of that planet, if there's any kind of difficulty, egocentric need, selfishness, that'll be brought up. And it does it so that you can move through it, so that you can remove these old obstacles, these obsolete ideas about how things should be, and move forward into a new pattern of life, a new pattern of understanding, essentially. And with the transits of these outer planets, they really create significant shifts in our consciousness. So it's not that they transit and then you think about something new, but you don't change. Like, for example, Mercury transiting certain signs or certain houses. You might get an idea, but it goes very quickly. But with these outer planets, they're usually significant life changes, aha moments, things that come up that really profoundly impact how you see the world and yourself and your relationship to it. So always remember that with these transits. Okay. One last thing. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. We'll just give an example of them in certain houses and how they can influence those houses. And we'll look at the 7th house. So if we have Uranus in the 7th house, or close to the 7th house cusp, in the birth chart, it can increase the likelihood of separation, or it can give 2 marriages, or it gives an unusual or unconventional relationship. Remember, it makes your relationship need to be a unique expression, something different. And oftentimes traditional roles within relationships don't work. If you have that, or if you have tendency towards that and you see Uranus transiting your 7th house or 7th cusp, that could be a difficult time for relationships, or a very profound time to transform the relationship into something more expressive of your individuality. Neptune in the 7th, or close to the 7th cusp, it can give a lot of false ideas around relationships, bring deception to relationships, and it can cause confusing conditions to arise around the relationships. Maybe you're prone to getting involved in affairs, or maybe you have that kind of indication based on other aspects of your chart, and now Neptune is transiting your 7th house cusp, and someone comes into your life which starts confusing you, starts pulling you away from what's been working really well for you, and you start thinking about something better, something different. What's happening is Neptune is bringing that sense of deception. So again, you have to be careful with Neptune. Now, if you're in a bad relationship, and Neptune crosses, well, it might just stimulate you to get out of the relationship to see if there can be something better. So you have to be careful, and you have to judge that within the birth chart itself. Have a good astrologer do that for you. Pluto in the 7th, or close to the cusp. Not easy at all. This creates a lot of intense, disruptive influences towards relationships, makes it difficult to have stable, harmonious relationships, and it makes a person try to be more dynamic within their relationship. There's a lot of change within relationships. There can be less satisfaction in regards to really connecting with someone else, because there are always these ideas about how it should be again, and then you never really find the right person. So with Pluto in the 7th, there are a lot of ego needs to work through in a relationship. And again, if you have those problems, and Pluto transits the 7th, or even the 1st house cusp, because that will challenge you as well, then you need to be aware that what Pluto is doing is bringing up obsolete ideas or thoughts, or rigid logical ideas or thoughts that you need to let go of. Okay, so So these are some thoughts on the outer planets. This is by no means exhaustive. You really need to look at this within your own chart, within the charts of people that you know. Get Ernst Wilhelm's course. Again, you can get it through my website. Study it. See how it works for you, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. But if you don't use it, fine. Vedic astrologers have not been using the outer planets for a long, long time and have been doing just fine. So this is all for your own consideration, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.